to the Planning Committee. First item is any apologies for absence. I know I had one.
From Councillor Mike Lewis, Chair.
Mike Lewis, thank you. Item 2, any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests? Are there any? No. Thank you. Item 3 is to approve and sign the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record, and that's page 1 to 5. So it's page 1, 2, page 3, page 4, and page 5. If somebody moves the true record, please. Thank you. Much appreciated. So then, any items for deferral or withdrawal is the next item, Chris?
No, they're on, Chair.
I'm doing good. Item 5 is the determination of planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. We begin with the first item there you'll find on page 9 is at 158 Dannegraig Road in Port Tennant. And Hayley, that's yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Prynawn da and good afternoon, members. One late letter of objection was received raising parking concerns as a result of the proposal, which has already been addressed within the officer's report, and comments from the Council's HMO team have also been received, and they raised no objection to the proposed development, and these are noted on the update sheet. The application has been reported to Planning Committee for decision because it's been called in by the local ward members, and a petition of objection of more than 20 signatures from different people at different addresses has been submitted, thus reaching in the call-in threshold. Okay, next slide. Thank you, Chris. The property is an end of terrace, two-storey building with a vacant A3 takeaway use located on the ground floor with residential accommodation on the first floor and is positioned within an established residential area. Dannegraig Road consists of predominantly two-storey terraced residential dwellings, as do the majority of the surrounding neighbouring streets. Next slide, please, Chris. The application site is currently served by a rear courtyard area, a two-storey outbuilding with storage and a food store area on the ground floor and storage above, and no off-street parking. Members were able to view the site at the site visit that was undertaken this morning, and I hope that was of benefit. Next slide, please. The aerial image identifies the application property and demonstrates the surrounding context in which the application sits. Okay, next slide, please. So full planning permission is sought for the change of use of 158 Dannegraig Road from a vacant ground floor takeaway class A3 use with existing residential accommodation to the first floor to a 6-bed house in multiple occupation, and associated changes including removal of existing single-storey rear extension and existing outbuilding to provide one off-street parking space. During the application process, a description of the development was amended to reduce the number of bedrooms from 7 to 6, and the application was thereafter re-registered, re-advertised, and the calling quests were confirmed to be maintained. The existing plans on the screen show that the ground floor currently contains a servery, commercial kitchen, food prep area, residential dining kitchen area, and a residential living room. To the first floor, there is currently 4 bedrooms and a bathroom, with the outbuilding providing storage space. Next slide, please, Chris. The proposed plans on the screen show that the ground floor will contain 3 ensuite bedrooms, a communal lounge dining kitchen and a toilet, with 3 ensuite bedrooms at first floor. The proposal will also see the removal of the existing rear outbuilding and replacement with an open parking space to the rear. Next slide, please, Chris. The proposal also includes relatively minor fenestration alterations, including the removal of an existing rear single-storey projection that is currently used as a food prep area for the kitchen and removal of the flues. The insertion of 2 additional ground floor side windows, one to be obscurely glazed, and replacement windows and doors on the other elevations. The applicant's agent has confirmed that the property will be occupied by 6 individual occupants. Statutory consultees were consulted and no objection has been raised to the proposal. Following consultation, 43 letters of objection were received and a petition containing 42 signatures objecting to the development. The objections are summarised on page 18 of the officer's report within the agenda pack, and these concerns have been addressed in detail in the officer's report. Next slide, please, Chris. So in terms of the principle of the use, policy H9 of the LDP and the HMO SPG is relevant, specifically the radius approach contained within the policy. Policy H9 states that outside of the HMO management area, a limit of 10% of all residential properties within a 50-metre radius can be HMOs. The site lies outside the HMO management area, so the 10% threshold applies. As can be seen from the map on the screen, with a 50-metre radius of the application property, there are 41 residential properties. And according to records held, 3 are existing HMOs. They are shown in red. Green are the existing dwelling houses, and yellow is the application site. If the proposed HMO was approved, the concentration percentage would be 9.76%, which would be below the 10% threshold. Furthermore, approval of the HMO would not result in sandwiching of a C3 dwelling between 2 HMOs, nor is the site on a small street. So in view of this, the principle is considered acceptable, subject to having an acceptable impact on other planning matters such as visual amenity, residential amenity, highway safety and ecology. So in terms of visual amenity, the external alterations are considered relatively minor and are acceptable. There is sufficient space to accommodate bin and bike storage to the rear of property, and again, that will have no unacceptable visual impact. In terms of residential amenity, the proposal will not result in any unacceptable impact on neighbouring occupiers in terms of increased overbearing, overlooking, overshadowing. There will be noise and disturbance generated from 6 unrelated individuals of the comings and goings from the property, but this is not considered to be over and above what is existing in terms of the existing use, in terms of the A3 takeaway use. The proposed shared amenity space would also provide adequate space for cooking, eating and socialising for 6 individuals, and they also have acceptable access to private amenity space, private external amenity space. Next slide, please, Chris. From assessing the proposed plans, it is noted that all 6 bedrooms exceed the recommended floor area of 10.2 square metres for a double bedroom as stated in the SPG. Again, like I said, the applicant's agent has confirmed that it will be occupied by 6 individual occupants. But however, in order to protect the amenities of the people living there, it's considered necessary to impose a condition to restrict the number of occupiers to 6, and that's Class C4 use, and to ensure that it's laid out in accordance with the approved plan. So in view of this, again, like I said, it will safeguard the amenities of neighbouring occupiers, the amenities of future occupiers of the HMO, and will prevent any over-demand of on-street parking. Next slide, please, Claire. So the authority's SPG requires that HMOs are provided with 3 parking spaces for the first 6 bedrooms and then 1 additional space for any bedrooms above that. The proposed HMO would therefore create demand for 3 spaces with 1 provided on site. In regard to any existing shortfall, the existing takeaway would create a demand for 1 commercial space and 1 space for non-residential occupiers. It's noted that the 4-bed residential accommodation could arguably itself require 3 spaces. However, this accommodation is clearly part of the takeaway unit. But therefore, any demand from the residential flat is partially accommodated by the spaces for the A3 use. And on that basis, the existing unit creates a total demand for 3 spaces. So therefore, the demand for parking for the existing and the proposed use is the same. The existing parking situation can be viewed on the photographs by the photographs on the screen, and which members viewed on the site visit this morning, which consists of a mix of restricted permit parking and some unrestricted parking, both on Dannegraig Road and Timau Road. The top 2 photos show views along Dannegraig Road, and the bottom view is the view along Timau Road. Whilst it's noted on-street parking is in demand, based on the above assessment, it can't be considered the proposed change would have any unacceptable impacts in regard to increased parking demand and no shortfall on site, compared to the existing takeaway with ancillary accommodation above. Furthermore, any illegal parking or obstructions are a matter for the authority's highway enforcement team or the police. So the implementation of the bin and bike store at the property and the retention of the car parking space for parking purposes will be secured by condition. And on that basis, the authority's highway officer has raised no objection subject to conditions. So it's considered the development would not result in any unacceptable impact on the highway safety. In terms of ecology, an acceptable green infrastructure statement has been submitted, and there are no concerns subject to the inclusion of an ecological enhancement condition. So in conclusion, and having regard to all material planning considerations, the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions as set out in the officer's report in the agenda pack. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed. Okay, I've got the first 2 speakers from the ward is Councillor Gwilliam. Are you with us?
Yeah, are you here? Can you hear me?
Yes, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of residents in our community, and for meeting on site this morning. I have mentioned previously, over the last 10 years especially, we've seen a significant rise in HMOs and the associated challenges that come with having them in the area. Many of the tenants are transient and have no affiliation with the community. There's been things like parties, rubbish, vermin, parking issues, parking obstructions, and these are often felt by the neighbouring properties, and the residents are often inconvenienced, disturbed and left feeling frustrated, frightened and upset. We continue to work with council departments and partner agencies to tackle these associated issues, but there are always no quick fixes, and the impact ultimately, as mentioned, is felt by residents in the community. Most of these properties are being bought by landlords who, again, are out of the area with no affiliation. They're buying up housing stock, pushing families, second, third generations out of the area where they lose vital support networks and family connections, pushing rents up to unaffordable rates, which we've seen quite a lot. You know, they charge per bedroom as opposed to one flat rate, and it's often felt that profit before people and community. It can prove difficult to contact landlords to tackle these issues, with many residents coming to myself or my colleague, Councillor Hale, for help to trace them. Specifically in relation to Dannegaig Road, this is a large end of terrace property on a busy junction. We have significant concerns relating to parking. Access for refuse trucks has been very difficult. Access is feared for emergency vehicles, and vehicles park right up to the junctions. Residents have seen accidents occur on a regular basis despite having traffic calming measures in place. Residents often advise that there are HMOs operating as well outside of planning and licensing, and they're able to identify some of those which we have passed over to the planning department. Whilst highways have suggested, you know, that there'd be limited impact, allowing two permits, and should not increase parking saturation as prior use. I wonder how this would be measured and policed. Refuge is regularly left down in the area, sometimes weeks before refuge can return to pick up the waste that's on the street. The parking saturation on the street and neighbouring is one of the most challenging in the St Thomas ward. I feel that by having another HMO, particularly on the street, will have a detrimental impact and add to the already challenging issues that residents are facing. I pose the question as to whether or not, if the proposed application were to be approved, would the landlord commit to being on call and contactable to deal with issues as and when they arise? Would they be willing to answer the calls late in the evening, as myself and my colleague often have to do? How would resident restrictions be managed from a distance, i.e. the 6 occupants only, or the limit of over demand of vehicles? I cannot see how this would effectively be managed, and therefore I would implore the committee to please consider turning down this application. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hale? You're on mute. There you are. Thank
Can you
you.
hear me?
Yes?
Yeah, thanks very much. Much in the same vein as my colleague. Undoubtedly the same as the last application that came before you, Pank Street, that the issues are going to be absolutely parallel. More noise issues, trouble with waste collections, more antisocial behaviour. But what me and my colleague are witnessing, and obviously I'm not born in St Thomas, not even born in Wales, but what Hayley William will recognise is the dismantling of her community. And I do feel, along with Councillor William, very disturbed by a process that allows a settled community to become a transient community. And for all the fine things that St Thomas has always been known for. One of those that was very high up was its community factor, and I think at one time it was voted the best community in Wales. But for the want of progress, or some might even say greed, that's all being cast asunder, isn't it? And it's just such a shame that we put more value now on bricks and mortar than we do people and people in our communities. So, of course, I'm going to object and would not want to see this passed today, but I am very fearful that it will be.
Okay, thank you. My first speaker is Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully support the local members on this one because I represented the Uplands area for over 20 years and we had a very similar thing. And when you think, oh yes, we can get hold of the owners, etc., it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, it's not going to happen. And I think what we've got to remember is with these multiple obligations, things are not going to get any better. And I feel very sorry for people living in St Thomas to have these because it will disrupt them. Their standard of life will be ruined. And like in Brent Mill, people were glad to get out. And I just feel it's all right. The plan is saying it concerns on all the rules and regulations. The end of the day at 2 o'clock in the morning, when there's a free-for-all outside on the road, the cars, etc., and the police don't turn up, I feel very, very sorry. We are going to have serious problems in the future with multiple homes, multiple occupation. I warn everybody, do not allow this to go through.
Thank you. I can see. Councillor Downey, I'm looking if there's anyone online as well.
Unfortunately, Chair, that we've got the policies and it's the 10%. So if we turn it down today on something else, it goes to appeal and they look at the 10% and then they say it's under that. I'd be the first one to agree with refusal if it went 0.1% over 10. Because we've got, and the policy is to safeguard everybody in the area. So unfortunately, that's one thing we've got to abide by. Again, parking is a big thing this side of the table. We always mention parking. I wasn't at the site visit, but I've seen it on Google Maps. If they knock the garage down, surely there's room for more than one car that we can, and because we only say there's got to be 4 cars, I think it says, 3 and then 1 off-road, but they've only got 6, so you don't have to do the 1 off-site. But if we can put it down as on one of the conditions, then let's do it, and let's make it a little bit easier. The other thing is, you're saying 6 people, 6 bedrooms. What happens if there's more than 6? How do we know? And how are you going to prove it? And that's another problem because if they go 2 to a room, who's going to find out? Only local members, more than likely. So what happens then?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I fully support Councillors Williams, Hales and Lewis's his comments regarding what I believe would be the dilution of a community with as a consequence of having transient people rather than residents. I am the councillor for the Uplands ward, and I see this virtually on a daily basis where, well, the community has been totally diluted. There's very, very few residents left, and those that are left wish that they could move but can't move because they find difficulty in selling their properties. I mean, this is something that I hear. So as a consequence, I can't support this application either. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? No.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, whilst I obviously understand the concerns that are being raised, as Councillor Downing said, the principle of the development, we have a policy, there's the 10% in place, that is to safeguard the community, and it is below that. So in terms, I just want to reiterate to members that there's a policy there in place, which I believe everybody agreed when it was going through the LDP process, and that is being met in terms of principle. In terms of, we have no control over the occupiers of the property. Whilst I appreciate you refer to them as transient people, that might not be the case. But we, in terms of the planning side of things, we have no control over who occupies those properties. And the landlord's duties in terms of being available and responding to issues, again, that's outside the remit of the planning, the planning scene. So unfortunately, we don't have any control over that. Parking, from the site visit this morning, Councillor Downing would have seen there is only space for one off-street parking space created by the demolition of that outbuilding. There's no room to create any further because you've got the access lane next to it. But then they would have 2 on-street parking spaces, which I believe they are able to apply for permits for them as well. And just finally, in terms of the conditions you said and enforcing them, we can monitor the property to see if 6 are occupied, but in all honesty, we do rely on local ward members or local residents to inform us if there are more people there, and we can report that to our enforcement team, and our enforcement team can go out and investigate to ensure that there's no breach occurring. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. I can see no other hands up. So you can see the recommendation there is to approve the application. So we take that vote now, please, Karen.
Yep. Councillor Mile Baker. For. Councillor Peter Black. For. Phil Downing.
For.
Alan Jeffrey.
Against.
Mary Jones.
For.
Richard Lewis.
Against.
Nicola Matthews.
For.
Mark Tribe.
For.
Mike White.
For.
Andrew Williams.
For.
And Paul Lloyd.
For.
That's 9 for, 2 against. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's carried. And then we move on to the next item, which you find on page 25, is up at Bryn Road in Clydach. And that's Eileen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Pnawn da. Okay, this application is seeking consent to change the use of 16 Bryn Road in Clydach from a 3-bedroom dwelling to a 5-bedroom house in multiple occupation, or a HMO. It will include fenestration alterations, and the rearmost part of the dwelling will be constructed to a cavity wall, and there will be a slight increase in the height of its roof. The application reported to committee because it's been called in by Councillor Rowlands and Councillor Bailey, and over the required number of objections have been received. There is an update sheet for this item following additional representations being made, and overnight we've received 7 additional letters of objections, and some are from the same address. But on review, these appears to be duplicate matters that are already being covered in the report and the update sheet that's before you. Thank you, Chris. This slide shows the general location of the site in the context of the surrounding area. The location of the site is identified by the red circle, and it's in the northern part of Clydach. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a more detailed site location plan with the site outlined in red, and there's an aerial image of the application site and the street in Bryn Road. This street is largely residential in character and comprising of semi-detached or detached or terrace properties. The street can be accessed via Hale Eithrim, which is also residential in character, or via Lone Road, which is a mixture of residential and small commercial units. Most properties on Bryn Road rely on street parking. Next slide, please. So this is the existing floor plan and elevation of the property and appears to contain 3 bedrooms. The property has a 2-storey rear wing, which then steps down to a single storey at its furthest point, and it benefits from a long rear garden. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the proposed floor plans and elevations of the property. The ground floor will have an ensuite bedroom towards the front, a lounge and an open plan kitchen dining area towards the rear. The first floor would contain 4 bedrooms, with one with an ensuite and another shower room as well. The single-storey structure at the rear of the property would be altered to a cavity construction and a marginal increase in its height. Fenestration, as I mentioned, would also be allowed to, altered, including blocking up some windows on the side elevation and enlarging one at the rear. The rear garden will also include a bin and cycle store. Next slide, please. So turning to the photographs, this slide shows the image of the front elevation of the property. And just to point out, as it's been picked up in the some of the comments received, there are some materials in the road there, as you can see. So that's covered in the report, but I can come back to that if required. Next slide, please. So this photo shows the rear and part side elevation of the property. It's evident that construction and refurbishment works is ongoing when these photographs were taken. The single-storey structure at the rear is in block work, but this sits alongside an extension of similar size at the adjoining property. Various openings within the existing walls of the property are also being altered, and some of those are already in the process in the photograph. Next slide, please. So this is a similar view, but further back in the rear garden, where the relationship with immediate neighbours can be seen. The garden has hedgerows and vegetation along the side boundaries. Next slide, please. This looks in the opposite direction, the view towards the rearmost part of the garden, which is further filled with trees and vegetation, separating the site from residential properties backing onto the site at Close Salem. Next slide, please. So this is taken from Bryn Road, looking southwest towards the junction with Hale Aithrim, and the application property is on the left-hand side with the scaffolding. Next slide, please. And then this slide is taken from the opposite direction, looking northeast towards the junction with Lone Road. Next slide, please. So in terms of planning history, the report explains that a planning application to change the use of the property to a 6-bedroom, 6-person HMO was refused earlier this year. The single reason for its refusal generally related to the lack of communal floor space inside the property to cater for 6 residents. But the application that's before you today has reduced the overall proposal to 5 bedrooms and 5 persons, and in doing so increased the amount of communal floor space within the property. The key issues to consider in the application relate to the principle of the HMO use, impact on visual amenity, residential amenity, impacts on community and social cohesion, and impacts on parking and highway safety. These matters have been addressed in various sections of the report, but I can summarise some for this presentation. The report also summarised public representations that we've received, which includes a petition containing 139 signatures and approximately 29 letters of objection and representations made by the local ward members. The grounds for objection are varied, but are mainly detailed on pages 31 and 32 of the report. So in terms of the principle of the use, the report makes a comprehensive assessment against the proposal of policy H9 of the LDP, which specifically deals with HMO applications, and this is supplemented by the adopted SPG on HMOs. It also includes consultations with colleagues in the placemaking and strategic planning section and the HMO and pollution control teams of the council. So the report includes a map which is replicated on this slide, and this forms part of the evidence in addressing policy H9. It lies outside the defined HMO management area, and there is a limit of 10% of all properties within a 50-metre radius that can be HMOs. There are 23 properties within the 50-metre radius, and there are no HMOs within it. The proposal would result in a concentration of HMOs within 50-metre radius being 4.35%, which is below the 10% threshold. The development would not result in the sandwiching of a Class C3 dwelling house between other HMO properties. It's noted that it is on a small street, and it does meet the small street criteria in the SPG, but the development would result in 1 property out of 23 properties becoming a HMO, and the report considers that this would not be a disproportionate concentration of HMOs. So overall, it complies with the requirements of policy H9 of the LDP and the SPG. In terms of visual amenity, the alterations to the structure at the rearmost part of the dwelling would be quite minor, It would retain a single-storey scale and would not be significantly visible from public positions. A condition has been recommended to control its external finishes. Other alterations, such as minor alterations to the fenestration and the siting of cycle and bin stores, are considered to be visually acceptable. In terms of residential amenity, the report considers that the 5 single-person bedrooms and the communal areas would meet and exceed the minimum room sizes set out in the SPG and would achieve adequate level of amenity for occupants. It is noted that the size of the bedrooms are only suitable for single persons, and a condition has been recommended to restrict the number of occupants to 5. The rear garden would provide adequate outdoor amenity space for residents, as well as space for refuse and cycle stores. The Council's HMO team have raised no objections apart from advisory notes. In terms of impact on neighbouring residents, the proposal would not involve an increase in the footprint of the building, and external alterations limited to fenestration alterations and works to the structure at the rearmost part of the building. Many rooms will utilise existing windows and openings. However, those which are being blocked up will be ensured that there's be a condition there to ensure that the amenities of neighbours are protected. This includes the windows facing number 18 Bryn Road, and the window to the rear would face the rear garden of the property, and there's acceptable distance between those and the properties behind at Close Salem. The blocking up of certain windows is subject to a planning condition, and the alterations to the rearmost part of the property are not considered to give any significant impact over and above to the neighbouring properties, particularly as the structure is sited alongside a comparable extension to the neighbouring property. In terms of noise and disturbance, the report explains that the use of the property for 5 unrelated individuals would not have any impacts in excess of a family home. And as mentioned, the Council's HMO and pollution control teams have not raised any objections to the proposal, and there is separate legislation associated with statutory noise nuisances. Impact on crime and antisocial behaviour have been raised by objectors, but these are primarily a matter for the police, and there's no overriding evidence that's been submitted to indicate that the change of use of this property to a 5-person HMO will generate crime and antisocial behaviour or an unsafe environment. There is no information either with the application to indicate that the property would be marketed for a particular type of specific section of the society, or that it would be used for a rehabilitation clinic. Whilst objections have been raised regarding who would be living in the property, the local planning authority has no control who the residents be living in there. If the property is rented, the owner would be required to manage the property in accordance with separate legislation, such as those applicable to landlord responsibilities. Whilst it's possible that the area may be predominantly owner-occupied, the report explains that due to the absence of other HMOs in the area, the scheme would not unduly dilute or harm the dominant character of the area. It must also be emphasised that the proposal would not breach the harmful concentration test, as I mentioned. And based on available evidence, the report explains that it would not lead to an increase in crime or social behaviour, or result in harmful effects to social cohesion within the local community, or affect the character of the area. It's been claimed that GP surgeries and dentists are full in the area, but this hasn't been supported with any strong evidence. However, whilst the provision of healthcare is primarily a matter for the Health Board, a HMO for up to 5 residents is unlikely to place any excessive pressures on the services compared to the existing lawful use as a dwelling, which is large enough and capable of accommodating a small family. In terms of parking and highway matters, the report acknowledges that the existing property does not benefit from any off-road parking, but neither does the majority of properties on Bryn Road. As shown in the photographs, Bryn Road generally contains unrestricted on-street parking. The Council's Parking Standards SPG advises that dwellings within Use Class C3 require a parking space per bedroom up to a maximum of 3. And for HMOs, 3 spaces are required for the first 6 occupants, with an additional space required per occupant above that. But this scheme is for 5 occupants and will be conditioned as such. The Highway Authority have no objection to the proposal, and the report considers that the proposal would not have any greater impact on the highway safety or parking requirements above the existing extant use of the property. The report concludes that the proposal satisfies the relevant planning policies and guidelines, and the recommendation is to approve subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got the two of the ward members who wish to address us today, and we begin with Councillor Bridget Rowlands, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I ask you to refuse the application concerning 16 Bryn Road on the following grounds, please. Insufficient parking and increased traffic pressure. The proposed change to a house of multiple occupation will multiply demand for the on-site parking. Bryn Road and the surrounding neighbourhood are already under intense parking strain. Residents frequently struggle to find safe legal spaces. The proposal would exacerbate highway safety concerns and create conflict over parking access for both residents and emergency services. The bottom of Bryn Road, where it joins Hale Eithrim, is steep and is unsuitable for buses. This was confirmed by Swansea Council during a recent nearby road closure. So the safety of all residents is a real concern to myself and my colleagues. As clearly there is only one access to the street safely for larger emergency vehicles, this must be considered in your decision. Swansea Council's planning guidance explicitly highlights adequacy of proposed parking and access arrangements and the effect of additional traffic as critical conditions in planning assessments. So then we go on to the development, not in keeping with the character of the area. The development is within a fully residential area. Yes, there are a few shops up on Sunnybank at the top where it meets Lone Road, but we're talking 3 or 4, not a lot at all. Many of the residents are elderly. Bryn Road is a walking route for children attending the nearby infants' schools. Key local policy instruments such as placemaking guidance for infill and backland development, preserving the integrity of existing residential form and character. Another concern is the adverse impacts on neighbouring amenity. The taller rear structure may significantly reduce natural light, daylight and sunlight for adjacent properties and intrude upon their privacy. A concern the planning guidance explicitly recognises as a valid objection point. The intensification of occupation, multiple tenants sharing the property, will bring increased come-ins and goings, noise and potential nuisance, especially in communal outdoor and service areas, undermining neighbours' quiet enjoyment of their homes, as addressed by many in the objections received. The development has already blocked the road whilst installing roofing tiles for a whole day. No road closure was in place, and builders' bags located on the main highway, a notice has been served. There are no safety precautions in place. There is also a quantity of old windows and doors leaned up against the house on the public pavement. Again, a hazardous situation. Plus, after the notice was served last week to remove the bags, the developer took delivery of 2 skips last week, positioned them on the main road outside number 16 with no lighting, a blatant disregard for authority and safety on the developer's behalf, and this does cause me concern going forward with the use of the HMO. So also then the unjustified concentration of HMOs within the area. Swansea's local development plan and SPG for HMOs recognise the impact of the sandwiching of HMOs between single family homes in Swansea, and this is what we have on Bryn Road. This policy exists to protect community balance. If this site gets approval, it possesses a legitimate planning concern deserving scrutiny. In conclusion, I therefore urge the committee to refuse consent based on the following grounds. I would place unacceptable strain on local parking, 5 extra spaces. There is no off-road parking provisions. This will compromise highway safety. The increase in people and vehicles could hinder emergency service access. The scale and bulk of the proposed structure are inappropriate and out of character within the surrounding area. There would be a significant loss of residential amenity, including reduced light, privacy and increased disturbance. The proposal raises concerns over the potential increase in HMOs within close proximity. There is insufficient provision for public transport to support the development. Overall, the proposal creates uncertainty and concern among neighbouring residents regarding the future character and livability of the area. The ruination of the community of Clydach by the introduction of this kind of establishment and a site meeting would confirm all the concerns of my residents, myself and my colleagues. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I please urge you to refuse this application.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey, would you like to address the committee, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Along with my colleague, Councillor Rowlands, I recently facilitated a public meeting with local residents last night, just to listen to some of their concerns directly. So the strength of feeling amongst local people is very clear. Residents are deeply concerned about the impact this proposal would have on our community. I've already submitted my objections as a ward member, and I hope members of the committee have had a chance to read and absorb its contents. I just want to spend a few minutes just to cover the contents of the meeting last night, and some of this will overlap with what Councillor Rowlands has just said as well. Parking and highway safety, Bryn Road, it is a very narrow terraced road. It appears to be a terraced street, although they are semi-detached. They are separated by a very, very narrow walkway. There's already very limited parking there, and I know some of the images you've shown maybe isn't a true reflection of different times of the day. In the evenings, you're almost guaranteed not to get a parking space on that street whatsoever. And there is no residence parking either. I believe the introduction of 5 unrelated occupants is highly likely to add several additional vehicles, which is going to worsen congestion, create safety issues on a school walking route. The local development plan, policy T1, requires safe access and adequate parking provision. The assumption that 5 separate households can be accommodated without additional car use, in my opinion, is just unrealistic. And paragraph 2.2 of the LDP actually states potential impacts on people's amenity will be assessed by considered elements such as visual impact, loss of light, overlooking, privacy disturbance, and likely traffic movements. If any councillors in this committee are aware of this road, they will see it's very narrow. I do believe a full survey needs to be completed to understand the levels of saturation at different times of day, and not just a snapshot of when somebody visits to take the photograph. Parking guidance suggests the parking at a 5-bedroom HMO will be the same as a typical family home. I disagree with that completely, and I would urge every councillor on this committee just to stop for a second and ask themselves if they agree with a 5-bedroom HMO just having 3 cars. That isn't going to be the same as a normal family home. Granted, there is a bike rack at the back of the house, but I don't think that is going to have a massive effect on reducing the amount of cars this property could have. The fact is, people do need cars for work, medical appointments, and more. I do believe there will be increase in noise and over-intensification. Residents last night were particularly concerned about the impact of 5 separate households living in one property, the equivalent of adding 5 one-bedroom flats into a quiet residential street. The additional comings and goings combined with noise from within the property would be a significant intrusion on neighbouring homes. This, in my opinion, represents an over-intensification, contrary to LDP policy H6 and the HMO supplementary planning guidance as well, both of which seek to maintain balanced and sustainable communities. Waste management. A family home generates a very different level of waste compared with a 5-person HMO. The pavement on Bryn Road is very narrow, and the identified waste storage area is wholly inadequate, in my opinion, to deal with recycling and refuse from 5 separate households. This will inevitably lead to overspill onto pavements, create environmental and amenity issues, contrary to policy PS2. Whilst that's granted that these are areas that other departments from the council will pick up, such as the environment department and noise pollution, we must recognise that our decisions here today do have a direct impact on those areas too. The people at the meeting last night felt there was no identified local need, and residents were very clear that there's no demonstrated requirement for this type of property in Clydach. They fear that approving this application would set a precedent, opening the doors to more HMOs, as we've sadly seen in places like Manselton and the city centre. Whilst I recognise the speculation about who might be living in the property is not a material planning consideration, I promised residents that I would raise their concerns, and people are worried about safety and about the future character of their street. Their fears ranged from the HMO being used to house illegal immigrants to offenders, including sex offenders. There's no legal requirement to stipulate who may live at the property under planning law, but this is something that needs to be addressed. And with it being a devolved issue to the Welsh Assembly, it's only within the power of the Assembly politicians to change this. Nevertheless, it is a real community concern, and a concern I said I would raise on their behalf, and those fears I don't believe can simply be dismissed. Finally, Chair, I must raise the issue of the developer's conduct. An extension has already been built up to the first floor level, as you've seen yourself, prior to planning permission being granted. This has raised serious eyebrows locally, and it speaks to a lack of respect for the planning process, and residents rightly ask why any applicant should be allowed to profit from a development that has already disregarded planning law. It certainly doesn't instill any confidence that the developer would comply with legislation in the future. In conclusion, members, I do believe this application is contrary to policies H6, T1 and PS2 of the Swansea Local Development Plan, as well as the Council's HMO supplementary planning guidance and relevant sections of Planning Policy Wales. Just want to touch on the point about the 10% test.
Can you wind up, Councillor Bailey, you've got 7 minutes, you're supposed to have 3. Can you wind up now, please?
I am done. So just want to touch the point where you said about the 10% test. It does meet the 10% test, but there are other areas we need to take into consideration. It's not purely whether it's within 10% or not. There are other areas that are really important in the planning decision. And I urge you to decline this application today, or at least postpone it until more assessments on parking, etc. have been made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any to say any? Oh, Councillor Lewis, sorry, I didn't see that. Come.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, like the previous one earlier, I feel very much for the 2 local members or 3 local members, where it is, in Clydach, because it does spoil the area. There's no two ways of it. Look at Bryn Mill. It was a very nice area for many years, served the community well. People built their families there, and now it's, again, you don't know exactly who is living there half the time. And I know that certainly the Uplands members, they are concerned what is going on. I actually think what we should be doing, instead of approving this today, we should look at redefining the reasons why this could be refused. Because it's a genuine, lots of people are concerned. They've been concerned for many years, and we still keep going on about the percentages, etc. Percentages can easily be altered. I've seen that in the planning committee in the past. You pick an area there, and it suits the application. But I think what we've got to look at is fairness and look out after the people that will be coming into the future. And I tell you what, multi-occupation is going to be a huge problem in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Tribe.
Thank you, Chair. I noted that the Plan Department only recommended to the landlord that he restrict the tenancy occupancy up to 5, but he could ignore that. It's not set in stone, and he could double that figure, and we wouldn't be any the wiser. Is there any way we could mandate him to restrict it to 5? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Alan?
Thank you, Chair. And again, Chair, fully concur with my colleagues, Councillors Rowland, Bailey and Lewis. I do always object to HMOs, bearing in mind the experiences that I've had being a councillor in the Uplands Ward. And I feel that one HMO could lead to a spate of them in the future, and that would destroy what appears to be a very close-knit community there on Bryn Road with about 20 so houses. And it would be, well, I feel it would be a disastrous thing if further HMOs were considered on that particular area. Thank you now.
Thank you. Got no one else wish to speak? No? Nobody online there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, quite a lot of issues associated with this, but most of those issues I could see that they have been covered in the report, and we also have a highway colleague as well in the in the meeting today if we got any particular on highway matters. But in terms of there is a condition on the recommendation about limiting to a maximum of 5. Because they've applied for a C4 use, that use class only allows up to 6 residents anyway. So anything beyond 6 would constitute a material change of use to another category. But what we've considered this as up to 6 residents, but we've realised that when you look at the space standards of our SPG, we've decided to go a bit further to limit it to 5 persons. And we consider that 5 persons is also applicable to the amount of internal floor space that's inside the property as communal space. This hasn't been treated lightly on the basis that we did have a previous application on this, which we did consider in context to policy, in context to supplementary planning guidance, and it did end up into a refusal. So the council do refuse as well as approve these type of applications. But with this resubmission, we acknowledge that they've dropped the number of residents, increased the amount of internal space, and we found ourselves in a situation where the evidence points to an approval. Now, I can only recommend to you members to follow the evidence and to follow the policies and the adopted guidelines that you have before us, and that leads to the conclusion of an approval. That's as much as I can say, really, without repeating some of the things that's been discussed. The only other thing that I would like to point out, which has occurred to us during the meeting, because the development has commenced and somebody has applied for permission during that, the condition number 1, which says the development shall not commence no later than 5 years, that condition no longer needs to apply if members of the planning committee agrees to approve the development. So that condition no longer applies because development would have already commenced. Okay, thank you.
Just for a clarification, Chair, when the officer said C4 equates to 6 people, but this is 5 people. So although we are saying 5, and if we allow this, it'll be a C4, so 6 people can stay there. Is that what the officer is saying, or is this C3.5?
I like that. No, the application is assessed as a C4. That is the use class, and that says within that use class is unrelated people, up to 6 unrelated people living, up to 6. Now then, we've decided to go on further to say it's still a C4 use, but we are restricting it to 5 residents. So it will still be classed as a C4 use class for this property, but it would be restricted via a condition for 5. So I hope that explains it.
Okay, understood. Okay, thank you very much. I got no other hands up to speak. No? Okay. So anyway, members, the recommendation there is to approve, and it has been explained to us the policies behind that, etc., which this committee agreed to. So anyway, it's for approval on page 42. So Gareth, would you do the honours, please?
Yeah, Councillor Myra Baker. Peter Black. 4. Phil Downing.
4.
Alan Jeffrey.
Against.
Mary Jones.
4.
Richard Lewis.
Against.
Nicola Matthews.
4.
Mark Tribe.
Against.
Mike White.
4.
Andrew Williams.
4.
Paul Lloyd.
4.
That's 8, 4, 3 against, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Gradually winning, Chairman.
Hmm?
Gradually winning.
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay, and then our final item, item 6, is the is the item relating to Pennard. And Jonathan, you win it up when you can.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Members will recall at July's Planning Committee, the report was presented in respect to an application to register a village green at Pennard Golf Club. The Council received the application on the 10th of September 2024 under Section 15 of the Commons Act 2006, seeking to register land located to the northeast of Pennard Golf Club as a town and village green. Or village green. The land also forms part of the registered common, known as Penny Cliffs and Burrows. Now, at the 1st of July Planning Committee, you received a comprehensive report from the Head of Planning, which included the original application, maps delineating the extent of the common land, the public rights of way, the details of the objections and representations received, and an inspector's preliminary report, which was prepared by the Common Registration Authority's appointed inspector. Now, under Section 15 of the Commons Act 2006, registration of a town or village green requires evidence that a significant number of local inhabitants or those from a neighbourhood within a locality have engaged as of right in lawful sports and pastimes on the land for a continuous period of at least 20 years. Such designation serves to protect the land from development, ensuring the continued availability for local recreational use. However, the potential amenity value or disadvantages to landowners are not factors when determining these applications. The crucial element to determine the validity of the application is whether the use of the land, as I said, can be characterised as of right, and that means without force, secrecy or permission. Members will recall at the July committee, the item was deferred, adjourned to allow further submissions following comments from Dr. Rees, who raised two principal concerns regarding the inspector's report. So the items were referred back to the inspector, and these two items were A, whether the required 20-year period of qualifying use must precede the date of the town and village green application, or if any 20-year period suffices. And secondly, whether the land within 20 metres of adjacent dwellings should be considered accepted land under the Countryside Rights of Way Act. So these matters were referred back to the inspector, and she's produced a supplementary report dated July the 31st this year. The inspector clarified that in respect of the 2 points raised, firstly, the relevant 20-year period must end at the date of the application, meaning that both the continuous use and its continuity up to the application date are statutorily required. This interpretation is supported by established legal precedent, which confirmed the qualifying period of 20 years must immediately precede the application. Regarding Dr. Rees's second point, the inspector agreed that the land within 20 metres of a dwelling or its garden is not classed as access land, but is known as accepted land, i.e., that's land which the public do not have a legal right to use for open-air recreation. Whilst part of the application land is within 20 metres of a dwelling, by no means the whole of the land is. As part of the statutory test, the land must have been in use for the relevant period for lawful sports and pastimes as a whole. In this case, it is clear that the applicant is incapable of establishing as of right, as I mentioned earlier, over a significant portion of the land applied to be registered. Therefore, the application must fail as presented. The Council, acting as registration authority, does have the discretion to accept amended applications for a reduced area. However, the inspector identified significant practical difficulties in accurately delineating such an area, as currently the evidence that's been submitted does not support this proposition. So to summarise, the inspector reiterated the original recommendation that the application should be refused in its entirety, as the statutory requirements for registration have not been met. And it has also been concluded that no useful purpose would be served by convening a public inquiry in this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I got two speakers who wish to address the committee. It's Dr. Andy Rees and then followed by Mr. Edward Harris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Prinhan Dar. Councillors, thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the three applicants. As a recap, town and village greens are not just picturesque reminders of a bygone age, they are a very present amenity to the local communities they serve. We have provided ample evidence that members of the local community have indulged as of right in recreational pastimes on the area we all call the Green continuously for the last 20 years, right up to the date of the application, and actually going back within my memory of at least the last 60 years. As of right means doing it openly and without permission, a key test for village green status, as opposed to by right, where people are allowed to do it by law. People have open access to common land by right under the Crow Act, but not within 20 metres of someone's property. I will not dwell on the 20-year period of evidence. As I said, we have provided that, but I did challenge the inspector's previous assertion, more of an academic argument, to be honest, that the 20-year period had to be right up to the date of the application. In her more recent report, in the decision of the House of Lords Appeal, Oxfordshire County Council versus Oxfordshire City Council in 2006 as a justification for the 20-year period of evidence. However, it's worth noting that Baroness Hale of Richmond, in her opinion on the Oxford case, stated, as Lord Diplock famously said in a 1978 case, the jurisdiction of the court is not to declare the law generally or to give advisory opinions. It is confined to declaring contested legal rights of the parties represented in the litigation before it and not those of anyone else. Turning to the accepted land under the Crow Act, where members of the local community have indulged in lawful pastimes as of right for the last 20 years, and actually considerably longer in this case, it is very helpful that the council officers have provided a map with the relevant area hatched in black. The inspector stated in her report for this meeting that the registration authority can, as a matter of discretion, accept an amendment to an application to register a lesser area of land than originally applied for, or, and this is really important, indeed, can take the step to register only part of the land of its own volition, i.e. of a decision of this committee. She claims it would be very difficult to define the physical scope of village green rights afforded to local inhabitants. We contend this is incorrect, in our opinion, as it would be pretty easy to delineate the area with the use of strategically placed rock boulders, as are commonly used throughout Gower to prevent access to common land by vehicles. Secondly, she claims we cannot provide evidence of recreational use within that 20-metre area. Again, this is incorrect, as we have already evidence of that part of the land being used for recreation. And indeed, only a week ago, a family played cricket on exactly that area of land. Not my family, another family that I don't know, and I have photographs and a video of this. The area of land hatched in black includes a flat grassed area to the south where sports have been and can be played. It is also an area where I've observed and photographed rare wax-cap mushrooms growing last year, and that is a relevant example of a qualifying recreational activity. The hatched area to the east is sloped and affords excellent views towards the iconic Kevin Bryn summit, and we believe is the exact area from which Lucien Pizarro produced his picture, I think in the 1930s, of Kevin Bryn that hangs in the Glenvivian Gallery, which I think is on show now. It is also well provided with blackberries that the local community harvest, again, an example of recreational activity. So we contend it will only be fair to the local community to give this area of land, as hatched in black on the map, the village green status it rightly deserves. It will strengthen its protection as a community green asset and will reinforce its existing designation as a green open space in the supplementary planning guidance for placemaking on Gower. We therefore ask the committee to approve village green status for the area hatched in black, as is the gift of the committee, as actually explained by the inspector. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you. And Mr. Harrison, please. Got your 5 minutes.
There we are. Yes, thank you. Chairman, nice to see you again. Thank you, members, for the opportunity. I'm a lawyer, and obviously I'm not going to disagree with a very learned barrister, the independent inspector who has given you advice and given you recommendation. I indeed do agree with her recommendation that this simply cannot be proven. And when you come to prove whether land is village green or not, you have to prove every single part of that definition which you've been told about. The big difference here, there may well be legal, practical and truthful arguments as to whether somebody did play cricket, whether they didn't play cricket, whether they kicked a football, whether they didn't kick a football, when they did it, and so forth, whether it was on a footpath or not. That is a matter can only really be tested by an independent inquiry where people give evidence on oath. What we're talking about here today is the legal point of, was this enjoyment as of right or was it by right? By right means that you're given that right by law. And we've heard that the Countryside and Right-of-Way Act of 2000 gave the public the right to use all common land as public access. Land within an urban area has been available for public access since 1925. That's Klein Common, for example. Pennard Common is a rural common. It was in the area of the Gower Rural District Council. So it's only since 2000 has it had public access. As Dr. Rees said, there is an area provision that if part of that public access land lies within 20 yards of a dwelling or of a garden of that dwelling, it is exempt land. You cannot go and enjoy your public rights over it. I spoke to the council officers this morning. I do not agree with the plan that has been prepared by your council officers. They need to draw the 20-metre line from the boundary of the gardens, not the perimeter of the ownership. So in fact, the area of hatch land that Dr. Rees refers to is very much smaller than as portrayed in the officer's plans. So the first point I would make, if you were minded to disregard the advice and recommendation of your officers and of your independent barrister, that a proper plan should be prepared based on the correct measurements from the correct space, and not from that's the practical legal ownership of the garden, not the legal ownership of the land. So I would ask you to first of all, or principally rather, to adopt the recommendation of your independent inspector and refuse the application as a whole. If you go against that recommendation, then I would ask you to look carefully. Maybe you have to refer it back again to look at the plan to be drawn properly. And we would say that even if you were minded to give village status over the hatched area, that hatched area on the plan you have before you is not the correct area. But don't go against the recommendation of your independent inspector. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify the point that Mr. Harris just raised? The plan is actually correct. There is a private ownership land, so it has been drawn in the correct position. There isn't a gap in between. There's land, there's the gardens, and then there's an area of private ownership, and then there's the land in question, which is part of the application that you're considering today. So the plan is actually correct. Yeah. Thank you.
Do I have a right to just object to that? Just to
Sorry,
say
no.
Okay.
Thank you. Any member wish to speak? Anyone? No. I can't see anyone online either. No. Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to come back with, Jonathan? No. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We sure? All right then. Well, you can see the recommendation on page 45, and I'll read it out. It's recommended that the recommendation of the appointed inspector is accepted and the application is formally dismissed. So we will be voting on that recommendation, please, Gareth.
Yeah, Councillor Meyer Baker.
For.
Peter Black. 4. Phil Downhill.
4.
Alan Jeffrey.
4.
Mary Jones.
4.
Richard Lewis.
4.
Nicola Matthews.
4.
Mark Tribe.
4.
Mike White.
4.
Andrew Williams.
4.
And Paul Lloyd.
And 4.
That's unanimous. Chair 11-4.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. And that concludes our business today. And we have a meeting on the 7th of October. Thank you all so much.
Bye.